Okay, so it's been about 20 minutes probably. And I'm not a very patient person, so while this was sort of soaking and the water was cooling, I was sort of pulling it apart. Again, my hands have been doing this for a lot of years. And can tolerate the heat. You do not have to do that. You can literally let this soak for all of, like 30 minutes and then begin to pull it apart. Okay? So, but you want to pull it into these little chunks. Okay? And you can see that it sort of wants to clump to itself, even in this form. Okay? If at this point, you are on campus with me, what we would do is we would put this into a blender. You don't want to use your home blender for this. And in fact, the old blender that we usually use is no longer with us. I've got to find one at a thrift store. For this purpose. A blender that you would use for making paper pulp, you would of course not want to use for, I don't know, making smoothies or daiquiris or whatever else you make in a blender that you want to eat. But using a blender would get this really smooth. We are going to attempt to get this smooth without using a mechanical means such as a blender. So that means once you've done that initial soak, with just enough water to get the paper wet and then to pull the roll apart in this way, you're going to soak it again. Okay? Again, at this step, if I had a blender, I would take this and I would put it in the blender with a little bit of water, and I would be doing that in order to get it smooth. I have heated up, boiled some more water, and I'm going to pour that over the top of this to give it another soak. And I'm going to take a spoon. Now you can use a kitchen spoon for this. It's just paper and water. It's not going to damage your spoon. Obviously this isn't a cooking spoon. This is a dye spoon. Okay, you can see how it's getting pulpier down in there with the water. We are going to go ahead and use the rest of that water to pour in here. Let's do that much and see what it does. Okay. Okay. It's turning into almost a mashed potato sort of consistency. A little bit lumpy on the mashed potatoes. Again, if you had a blender, you could get a much smoother mashed potato consistency. But again, I am not at all recommending that you use your own personal blender, your family's blender. Don't use a blender unless it's a blender that you're only ever going to use for paper ever again. I'm going to go ahead and pour just this last bit in there. If you get it a little too wet, it's not a problem. You can squeeze it out. I'm just being a little conservative about the amount of water that I put in here. I may add some more water later once I add the glue. But we'll see how that goes. Okay, so now you are going to need to let this sit before you get into it with your hands. Because unlike with the paper and a roll, it's not going to dissipate the heat quite as much. But you can see we've broken that down even further. I'm sort of using this like a mortar and pestle. In using this process without the blender, you will never get it as smooth as your paper clay there, but you will get it to a place where you can work with it pretty easily. Okay? All right, so once you have mashed and mashed and mashed, gotten it nice and pulpy, down in the water. Okay. You can now let this sit again for, 15, 20 minutes, however long it takes for the heat to dissipate while you go and do something else with your life. Okay? And then we'll come back and we'll get the binders put into it. All right?